You wake up and reach for your phone before you even open your eyes, and for half a second you forget. Then it comes back. There's no one to text, no one waiting to hear how you slept. The apartment is exactly as quiet as it was last night, and that quiet isn't peaceful yet, it's just empty. You lie there for a minute feeling the specific weight of a day that has nobody built into it. Nothing dramatic happened. No fight, no loss, no bad news. That's almost the strange part. You're not grieving a single explosive event. You're just alone in the ordinary, unremarkable way that doesn't make a good story, the kind nobody writes songs about, the kind where you simply exist in a space built for two, and there's only you in it. You make coffee for one. You glance at your phone out of habit, not because you're expecting anything, just because the habit hasn't caught up with the new reality yet. You sit with the kind of silence that has nothing dramatic in it, and somehow that's worse than the dramatic kind, because at least drama gives you something to point at and say, this is why it hurts. And then the thought arrives, the one almost everyone in this position has had at least once. Is something wrong with me? The short answer is no. The long answer is what we're going to explore today with depth and honesty, because being alone, genuinely alone, has a specific psychological and philosophical architecture that the Stoics mapped out 2,000 years before modern psychology gave it names like attachment style, anxious avoidant, or fear of abandonment. And once you see that architecture clearly, you stop experiencing your situation as a wound and start experiencing it as valuable information. Information that can prepare you to build connections that are much deeper, more authentic, and yes, more magnetic. But first you need to hear something nobody says to you directly, something that cuts through all the self-help noise and gets straight to the bone of what's actually happening. You live in a culture that treats partnership as the ultimate proof of personal worth. The person who's never single wins. The person in a relationship is doing life right. The person alone is missing something, waiting for someone, incomplete, until another person shows up to complete the picture. Every movie ends with the couple kissing. Every holiday commercial is built for two. Every well-meaning question from family. Are you seeing anyone yet? How's your love life? When are you going to settle down? Is really just one question asked 100 different ways, as if not having found someone yet were a problem that requires constant reassurance rather than simply a fact about this season of your life. It starts early. In school, you get paired off for projects, and being the one without a partner already feels like a small public verdict. In the workplace, the same current runs underneath casual conversation. The couple at the holiday party, the +1 on the invitation, the assumption that of course you're building your life towards someone. Social media doesn't help. Feeds full of happy couples, anniversaries, and perfectly framed moments that make your quiet Tuesday feel even heavier. And at some point, without ever noticing the exact moment it happened, you started believing they might be right, that maybe there really is something to fix, that the quiet apartment is a defect rather than a condition to be lived inside of, skillfully and consciously, the way a Stoic would live inside any circumstance life hands them. The Stoics built their entire philosophy on the opposite premise. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world at his time, a man who could have had anyone's company on demand, wrote in his private notebook, never meant for publication, that a person's true worth is measured by what they are when nobody is watching, and nobody is there to witness it. Not what they possess, not who chose them, not who stayed. What they are, alone, in the room, with no audience and no performance. Think about that for a moment. The Emperor of Rome, surrounded by advisors, senators, soldiers, and servants, still felt the need to remind himself that his real value had nothing to do with any of them. If he needed that reminder, how much more do we, living in a world where our worth is constantly measured in likes, shares, comments, and the simple, aching question of whether someone chose us today? This wasn't comfort talk for someone feeling sorry for themselves. It was a practical, tested principle, the same way an engineer tests a load-bearing wall before trusting it with the weight of a building. The Stoics divided everything in life into two categories: what is in your control and what isn't. Whether someone stays or leaves is not in your control. Whether someone walks through the door tonight is not in your control. Whether that person you're thinking about right now, the one whose name you haven't said out loud but who occupies more space in your mind than you'd like to admit, whether they ever reach out again, That is not in your control. Who you are while you wait, what you build with the hours that have no one else's name on them, how you carry yourself through an ordinary Tuesday with nobody checking in, that is entirely yours. And they considered this the only category truly worth mastering, because it's the only one that can never be taken away by someone else's decision, no matter how much it hurts in the moment. Here's where it gets concrete and deeply practical for your daily life. Seneca wrote that nothing is heavier than a life that leans entirely on someone else, because the moment that person is absent, even temporarily, you fall. He wasn't warning against love or connection. He treasured friendship and wrote beautifully about the value of close bonds. He was warning against a self that has no flaw of its own, a self that only exists in the reflection of someone else's attention, constantly checking whether it's okay by checking whether someone else seems happy with it. That's not love. That's dependency wearing love's clothes, and it always ends the same way. Not because people are cruel, but because no human being can carry the weight of being someone else's entire emotional foundation. It's too heavy. It's unfair to ask, and it's unsustainable to expect. The Stoics called this kind of emotional dependency a sickness disguised as devotion. From the outside, it can look romantic. He loves so hard, people say. From the inside, it's a person who has handed their entire emotional foundation to someone else's presence. When that presence disappears, even for a short time, they discover there was never a real flaw underneath them, only rented space that just expired. And then they panic, not because they miss the person in a healthy way, but because they no longer know who they are without that person's gaze confirming their existence. That's not love. That's existential collapse waiting to happen, and it happens every single day to people who never learned the difference between wanting someone and needing someone to survive. You are not necessarily in that extreme position. Feeling the absence of someone is different from collapsing without them. Feeling absence means you had a self before, and that self is still there, just temporarily unaccompanied, still standing, still functioning, just quieter than it would prefer to be. That's not collapse. That's structure under pressure, exactly the condition the Stoics trained for deliberately, the way an athlete trains with resistance instead of avoiding it. An athlete doesn't get stronger by avoiding weight. They get stronger by bearing it, by learning to stand steady while the load presses down. You are doing that right now, whether you recognize it or not. Every morning you get up, make coffee, go through your day, return to the quiet apartment, and wake up again the next day. That's not weakness. That's endurance. That's the muscle of selfhood growing stronger, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. There's a specific Stoic exercise that almost nobody talks about outside of deeper studies, and it explains exactly what you're living right now. Epictetus taught his students to mentally rehearse loss before it happened, not to make themselves miserable, not because he wanted his students suffering, but to understand in advance that anything outside your own judgment can be taken away. The people who suffer most aren't those who experience loss. Everyone does eventually. But those who never imagined the room without the other person until it actually emptied and they had no framework for what they were looking at. They're blindsided, not because the loss was uniquely cruel, but because they never prepared themselves for the possibility that the person they built their world around might one day walk out. And when that door closes, their whole world goes with it. Because they never built anything of their own, you are no longer rehearsing, you are living it. And that places you exactly where Stoic philosophy was designed to work best. Not in comfortable theory discussed in a seminar, but in the real afternoon in a quiet apartment, with no one to report your day to, no one to ask how the meeting went, no one whose key might turn in the lock later tonight. This is the laboratory. This is where the real work happens. Not in meditation retreats or weekend workshops, but in the ordinary unglamorous hours when nobody is watching and there's no one to perform for. That's where character is built, and that's where the foundation for any future connection, any real, lasting, magnetic connection, must be laid. And once you stop treating this silence as a malfunction or a punishment, something shifts. Quietly at first, then more completely. The silence stops sounding only like absence and starts sounding like space. Time you once spent managing someone else's mood. reading micro-expressions for warning signs, explaining yourself, adjusting your plans around another person's preferences, negotiating whose turn it was to compromise. That time is now entirely yours, without asterisks, without needing to check whether anyone minds. That's not a small thing. That's liberation wearing a quiet face. Most people never get an uninterrupted stretch long enough to truly hear their own thoughts, because there's always another voice filling the gaps before their own thoughts finish forming. Someone asks what you think of a film before you've finished forming your own opinion. Someone's mood colors your evening before you've checked in with your own. Someone's text message demands a response before you've even decided how you actually feel about the subject at hand. You don't have that interference today. The room is quiet enough to hear yourself for once, and that's not a small thing, even though it doesn't feel like much while you're sitting inside it. It's the exact condition the Stoics considered necessary for anyone serious about understanding their own mind and becoming someone capable of deeper, healthier connections. They didn't fear silence, they sought it. They knew that the noise of the world, other people's opinions, other people's demands, other people's drama, was the primary obstacle to clarity. And clarity, they believed, was the foundation of all wise action, including wise action in love and relationships. And here's something most men never realize until it's too late. All the inner work in the world, all the Stoic discipline, all the self-sufficiency, all the emotional independence is only half of the equation. Because when you finally meet a woman who makes your heart race, when you're standing across from her and you feel that electric tension, all that inner strength means nothing if you don't know how to communicate it, if you don't know how to make her feel it, if you don't have the tools to translate your quiet confidence into the kind of desire that makes her unable to stop thinking about you. That's where the obsession method comes in. It's a complete system that teaches you a specific encrypted language based on advanced psychological research that allows you to connect with a woman's deepest desires and make her feel an uncontrollable attraction to you. It's not about tricks or manipulation. It's about finally knowing how to communicate in a way that speaks directly to what she truly wants. If you're ready to bridge that gap between inner strength and outer results, the link to the obsession method is in the description. There's a second piece that most people miss entirely, and it's about what they assume alone actually means. They assume it means lonely, automatically, instantly, as if the two words were the same wearing different clothes. They're not. Loneliness is a feeling, a specific ache that can show up anywhere in any company at any hour. It's the disconnection between your inner experience and your outer circumstances. You can be surrounded by people at a party, laughing along, technically accompanied, and feel completely unseen. And you can be sitting by yourself on a Friday night, no plans, no calls, phone quiet on the table, and feel entirely whole, entirely at ease in your own company. The difference isn't the number of people in the room. The difference is whether you've made peace with yourself, whether you've built an internal home that doesn't require visitors to feel like a home at all. The Stoics had a specific word for the kind of person who could do this: autarkia, self-sufficiency. It didn't mean never needing anyone, never wanting company, never missing a specific person's voice or presence. It meant never being structurally dependent on anyone else's presence as the precondition for your own sense of being whole. A self-sufficient person can still want connection, can still miss someone intensely, can still feel the ache of an empty side of the bed at 11 at night, and none of that contradicts self-sufficiency. What contradicts it is needing that person to exist before you're allowed to feel like a complete version of yourself. That's the difference between wanting and needing, and it's the difference between a healthy relationship and a codependent one. A healthy relationship is two whole people choosing to share their lives. A codependent one is two halves trying to make a whole, and it never works, because two halves don't make a whole. They make a perpetual state of mutual lack. Think about what that actually means for the day you're having right now, concretely. You can miss someone and still be whole. Those aren't opposites pulling against each other. The discomfort you're sitting with right now isn't proof that you're broken without someone else. It's proof that you're capable of wanting something, which is a very different category from being incapable of functioning without it. Wanting is healthy. It's the engine of growth, the reason we reach out, connect, build, and create. Needing is different. Needing is the sense that without this specific thing or person, you will somehow be less, incomplete, not quite real. That's not love. That's addiction, and the Stoics understood addiction long before it had a clinical name. They called it slavery, the condition of being ruled by something outside yourself. Here's the part that will probably land hardest. There are two versions of being alone that look identical from the outside, but are completely different on the inside. One is solitude you've chosen to build something in, time you're actively using to become steadier, calmer, less reactive, more grounded in what you actually think. The other is isolation you've fallen into because connection started to feel dangerous. One is a Stoic practice, deliberate, chosen, oriented toward growth. The other is a wound-wearing philosophy as a disguise. And here's the honest question you need to ask yourself right now, not as judgment, but as simple information. Which one is this for you? If your aloneness feels like space you're using to build yourself, even if it's uncomfortable, even if there are moments when you'd give anything for someone to walk through that door, you're in the right place. You're in the gym, and the discomfort is the resistance that makes you stronger. If it feels more like a wall, more like a fortress you've built to keep everyone out because letting anyone in feels too risky, too painful, too likely to end in more loss, that's honest information about where the actual work needs to happen. That's not a failure. That's a signpost. It tells you that the next step isn't necessarily finding someone. It's gradually, gently, carefully testing whether closeness is as dangerous as it once felt, whether you can let someone in without losing yourself in the process. And that work, more often than not, comes down to the same root the Stoics kept circling back to. You stop reacting to the absence of someone else's presence as if it were a verdict on your worth, and you start treating it as exactly what it is, one variable in one season of an otherwise long life. There's an older Stoic test for this that comes from the tradition before Marcus, a kind of thought experiment that cuts through all the self-deception. Could you take everything that makes you who you are and carry it with you into a completely different life, with completely different people, in a completely different city, and still recognize yourself on the other side? If yes, what you've built is real. It's portable. It's yours. If no, if you'd dissolve without the specific circumstances, the specific people, the specific roles you play, then what you've built is borrowed, and borrowed things get taken back eventually. Apply that test to this exact apartment, this exact silence. Are you still you underneath the discomfort? Is there a person there who would exist even if nobody ever walked through that door again? If the answer is yes, even a quiet, uncertain yes, then you're further along than you think. You already have the foundation. You just need to recognize it and build on it. This doesn't mean other people don't matter. The Stoics valued bonds deeply. Seneca wrote letters to friends that are still read 2,000 years later because of their warmth. Marcus spoke of his teachers, his family, his colleagues with genuine affection. The point was never to become cold or detached. The point was to let connections be additions to a life that's already whole, not patches on a life that's broken. A whole person doesn't need less love. They need love differently. They love without clinging. They give without losing themselves. They receive without becoming dependent. That's not weakness, that's the highest form of emotional strength, and it's available to anyone willing to do the work. If you've ever caught yourself spiraling, replaying conversations, checking your phone every few minutes, rereading old messages to see if you missed something, analyzing every word for hidden meaning, that pull has a mechanism. It's not random. It's not weakness. It's a specific psychological pattern that has been studied, understood, and most importantly can be redirected. Understanding it is the first step to loosening its grip, and that understanding is exactly what the deeper work offers. But understanding alone won't make a woman's heart race when she sees your name on her phone. Understanding alone won't make her lie awake at night thinking about you, replaying your words, feeling that ache of desire that she can't quite explain. For that, you need more than philosophy. You need a practical system. You need a language. And that's exactly what the obsession method provides. It's a complete step-by-step system that teaches you the encrypted language that speaks directly to a woman's deepest desires. Based on advanced psychological research, This method shows you exactly how to use precise timing, body language, storytelling, and specific communication techniques that make her feel an uncontrollable pull toward you. You'll learn when to make a move, when to go for the kiss, when to escalate it so you never make a mistake and get rejected again. You'll learn how to make her feel a deep desire for you, the kind of desire that makes her obsess over you for as long as you want. And you'll learn how to keep her committed and dreaming about you, regardless of your circumstances. Because the obsession method works based on how you communicate, not what you look like or how much money you have. This is the practical bridge between the Stoic foundation you're building and the magnetic connection you truly want. The full program is linked in the description. So here's what's actually true about the quiet apartment, the unanswered phone, the ordinary Tuesday that still feels heavy. None of it is evidence against you. None of it means you're unlovable, broken, or destined to be alone forever. Marcus ruled an empire and still worked on himself alone by lamplight, writing reminders to himself about patience, kindness, and the fleeting nature of everything. Seneca and Epictetus taught that the only things truly yours are the ones no one can take by leaving. Your character, your choices, your ability to respond rather than react. Those are the things that remain. Those are the things that make you who you are, whether there's someone in the bed next to you or not. But here's the truth that most self-help gurus won't tell you. Becoming a solid Stoic man is only the beginning. It's the foundation, yes, the non-negotiable base. But if you don't know how to translate that inner strength into the kind of communication that makes a woman's body respond before her mind even catches up, you'll still be the guy she calls nice, but never thinks about late at night. You'll still be the guy who has his life together, but can't figure out why women don't see him that way. And that gap, that painful, confusing gap between being a good man and being a man women desire, is exactly what the obsession method was created to close. Think about it. You've done the work. You've sat with the silence. You've built the self-sufficiency. You've learned to stand on your own 2 feet. Now imagine what happens when you combine that unshakable inner core with the ability to make any woman feel an intense, almost uncontrollable sexual desire for you. Imagine walking into a room and knowing, not hoping, not guessing, but knowing that you have the tools to make her feel something she's never felt before. Not because you're pretending to be someone else, but because you finally have the language to express the man you've become. That's the power of combining Stoic inner work with the practical psychology of the obsession method. When you strengthen that foundation, when you build that unshakable inner core and learn the encrypted language that speaks directly to a woman's deepest desires, you don't just survive the silence better. You become capable of creating something much more powerful when the right connection appears. A dynamic where she feels safe, seen, and increasingly drawn to you. Not because you're performing, not because you're trying to impress, but because your calm strength combined with your deep understanding of female psychology allows natural desire to grow in a way that feels effortless and real. She won't just like you, she won't just be comfortable with you. She'll obsess over you in the healthiest, most passionate way possible. She'll think about you when you're not there. She'll crave your presence. She'll dream about you. And she'll wonder quietly how she got so lucky to find a man who makes her feel this way. That's the combination. That's what turns ordinary days of solitude into the preparation for extraordinary connections. Not just any connections, the kind that make both of you feel alive, electrified, and completely, utterly certain that you found something rare. Tell me in the comments, when the room goes quiet, does it feel more like absence or like space these days? Has that feeling changed for you over time? Has it shifted from emptiness to something else, even just a little? And if you know someone going through solitude right now, someone who might need to hear this message, send them this video. Sometimes the best thing we can do for someone else is simply to let them know they're not the only one sitting in that quiet room. If today's reflection touched you, subscribe. Every week we bring Stoic philosophy applied to real modern challenges in life, emotions and relationships. No fluff, no empty motivational slogans, just honest, practical wisdom that meets you where you are and helps you move forward one step at a time. And if you're ready, truly ready, to stop just surviving your solitude and start building the kind of magnetic presence that makes women feel an uncontrollable desire for you, then the obsession method is waiting for you right now. This is the most advanced, scientifically validated system for creating deep attraction and healthy obsession. The obsession method teaches you the encrypted language, the precise communication techniques, and the psychological principles that make women feel drawn to you on a level they can't explain. It's the complete program. All the tools you need, all the techniques, all the strategies, packaged into one comprehensive system. And the obsession method works regardless of your looks, age, or circumstances, because it's about how you communicate, not what you look like. You have two choices right now. You can close this window and walk away, and keep wondering what could have been. Or you can click the link in the description, get started with the obsession method, and finally experience what it feels like to have women feel an intense, lasting desire for you. The choice is yours. The link is waiting. Take the step when you're ready. You've already survived the hardest part, the waking up alone, the quiet mornings, the evenings with no one to share them with. Now you can build something stronger. Now you can build a version of yourself that doesn't just survive the silence, but walks into any room and makes every woman in it wonder who you are and why they can't stop thinking about you.